to say thanks to everyone who's made this possible and all those that who have nominated me for this. It's an honor and a privilege to receive this, but it's also an honor and a privilege to work for this great city and to serve this city and serve the community and the citizens of this great city that we have. And I don't take this lightly, and I don't take my job lightly, and I love my job, and that's why I do what I do. And thank you again, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Presentations. We have no presentations on tonight's agenda, so we'll move to public hearings. We have two public hearings this evening, and the first is hereby open for Ordinance 17-6, amending the zoning ordinance by adding new district known as Central Business Expansion District, B2E. Mr. Soar, would you please summarize this matter for the public?
Yes, I'll be glad to. As council is aware, this item was considered and approved on first reading at our December meeting. This is one of the goals from our 2017 year. City Council asked our economic and community development staff to analyze the West State Street corridor and come up with a plan for the redevelopment of this important commercial area. As staff looked at this area, they noticed the unique character, and in fact, it's really a little more like our downtown than it is a traditional commercial strip that we have further out West State Street or down the Volunteer Parkway. This area is currently Zone B3, but if you look at the B3 restrictions, there are impediments to the redevelopment of this area in terms of setbacks and parking requirements that are more specific to a different type of commercial strip than what you see on West State Street from the Volunteer Parkway out to approximately 18th Street. So with that in mind, I know this was presented in November to a work session to City Council. It comes to you with a unanimous recommendation from our Planning Commission. And I'm going to ask Sheriff Marshall now, our senior planner, to come forward and detail the specifics behind the Central Business District expansion, or what's known as the B2E.
Thank you, Mr. Sora. Good evening, council members. Tonight I just have a few brief key points to highlight and overview the B2E ordinance that you have in front of you tonight. The goal of this ordinance really is, as Mr. Sora said, to remove impediments from the area and to encourage redevelopment that's compatible with existing development patterns. This has been a several month-long process in creation. We started working with the Planning Commission on this in the very late spring, early summer. So it's been through several discussions with the Planning Commission. We've had a community meeting with the community there along West State Street back in October. And then in November of 2017, the Planning Commission unanimously voted to recommend to City Council to approve and establish this B2E district. A quick summary of some of the changes that are included in the ordinance. As Mr. Soares said, it does replicate many of the B2 district standards or the downtown standards in terms of setback, building height, signage, landscaping, and design standards. Many of the uses that exist in the district today in the current B3 area will still be allowed to continue and go on. Permitted uses include restaurants, retail, offices, printing facilities, automobile sales and service, churches, civic organizations, along with the existing single-family and duplex units, multifamily, up to 30 units per acre, and then some limited manufacturing uses, if they're in conjunction with a retail use. One of the highlights of the ordinance is that it does allow for some parking reduction. For all non-residential uses except for food services, those uses will receive a 50% parking reduction from what is the current standard. Parking for residential units will be the same. And then food services will be tiered based on the type of food service that they operate. A sit-down restaurant will not receive a reduction, so it will be required to fully comply with our parking regulations now. A cafe-style restaurant will receive a 25% reduction, and then a specialty food service, something like a caterer, would receive the 50% reduction. One other key thing that we're proposing in this ordinance is to change the allowance for off-site parking, and this would apply citywide, not just in the B2E district, but it would allow someone interested in an off-site parking agreement to apply through the site plan approval process for an off-site parking arrangement rather than go through the BZA or Board of Zoning Appeals. The requirement would still remain that the parking arrangement be within 400 feet of the subject parcel and would require the property owner to submit a deed or long-term lease that would be approved and recorded. Tonight is the first part of a two-step process. Tonight, we would ask for the creation of the district itself. This would be followed by a second step, which is to actually rezone the properties to B2E. So the map that's on the screen right now, highlighted in yellow, is roughly that area that would be proposed for rezoning. It's all currently zoned B3 and runs from Volunteer Parkway to 18th Street. So if the ordinance is established tonight, we would come back, we would go to Planning Commission in February, so probably in March, to begin presenting the rezoning application to City Council. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And as this is public hearing, would anyone in the audience like to address council on this matter? Go ahead. If you'll come on up to the podium for us, thank you. As you do come up, if you'll state your name and address.
My name's Wayne Cheney. Excuse me. Just a question. Are these zoning requirements, have they been presented to the Planning Commission by anyone in particular that has plans to develop that area?
Staff, would you like to address that?
Don't think the answer to your question would be no. It was presented to the Planning Commission by staff. That doesn't mean that there aren't projects underway that would take advantage of this zoning.
And may I ask another question, please? I have a business that is within that boundary. Will my business be affected by this rezoning? The business has been there a long time, 30 years, but will that be changed?
I'm sorry?
Will that be changed in any way?
The rezoning is considered the B2E from the current B3 from the Volunteer Parkway linearly to the west to 18th Street. What this rezoning does would actually facilitate the redevelopment of properties along this route, and that, as Ms. Marshall indicated, it lessens some of the restrictions that a B3 zone and the regulations associated with that zone would not make it practical for much of that property to redevelop.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If I understand, let me restate it another way to make sure I understand. I think what you're trying to get at is how would it affect your business operation currently?
Exactly.
So it will not, am I correct to say that it will not have an effect on your existing?
It has no effect on any existing business there. What it does do is it facilitates any redevelopment, any future redevelopment of the properties within the area that would be ultimately rezoned to the B2E.
I've heard rumors of things that are going on, and it's just that, it's rumors, I think. And I just wanted to allay my fears, I guess, that something's going to happen next door to me or to me.
What you might want to do is check in this week or next week with our planning staff.
Okay.
And they can look at your property and talk about what could be different future if you chose to sell it or redevelop or whatever. But I think they're available to address your specific property
and
answer questions.
Okay.
One important point about the hearing for this tonight is just to create the zone. So with our vote tonight, it's designating an area that we see, but if I understand correctly, it's not rezoning everything right now, correct? And staff acknowledge that's...
Yes, well, all this does is establish the new district, the actual rezoning, while there'll be a recommendation, and that's noted on the plan, on the overhead. That has not been considered by Planning Commission yet, and that's a separate process.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any others wishing to address council on this public hearing? All right, seeing no others, this public hearing is hereby closed. Next, the public hearing is hereby opened for Ordinance 17-7, amending the zoning ordinance as it relates to multifamily densities in 2 districts and creating an additional multifamily residential district known as the high-density multifamily R5 district. Mr. Soar, would you please summarize this matter for the public?
Yes, Mayor, this issue also comes to you with a favorable recommendation from the Planning Commission. Late last summer, early fall, the Planning Commission requested the community development staff to evaluate the multifamily zoning, the multifamily densities in several zones, one being the B3, one being the R3, the R4, and then analyze or do some research into our existing regulations and how they compare to some of our neighbors. And as after staff conducted this research, they came back with several recommendations that the Planning Commission worked their way through. Ultimately, it changed the density in the B3. It also changed the density in the R4, and it created subsequently an R5 high-density multifamily proposed zoning district. This matter was considered on first reading last month, and Blake Ayler, our zoning administrator, is here to further detail this issue for you.
Thank you, Mr. Soar. Good evening, council members. As Mr. Soar stated, this is an ordinance to amend the zoning ordinance to change allowed densities in the R4, which is the high-density multifamily district, the B3, which is our general business district, as well as creating a new zoning district, which would be the R5 high-density multifamily. And during recent conversations with developers as well as Planning Commission in regards to the allowed densities within those districts I mentioned, the B3, the R3, and the R4, staff was given the directive of researching the city's densities and compare those with the surrounding communities of Johnson City, Kingsport, and Bristol, Virginia, to see how those cities stack up with ours. Again, this was unanimously recommended by the Planning Commission on November the 20th of 2017. First, we'll start with the residential districts. Given the low-density residential character within many of Bristol's R3 districts, the density of 13 units an acre we feel is an appropriate density within the city's R3 and should not be modified. It should stay the same. However, if you look in the zoning ordinance, you'll find a large gap between the 13 units allowed within that R3 and the 44 units allowed within our current R4 district. When we look at the surrounding communities that I mentioned earlier, you'll see an average density of an R4 district is 23 units an acre. Furthermore, in Johnson City with their R6 and Kingsport with their R5, they have an average density of 32 units an acre. Therefore, Planning Commission recommended lowering the R4 district to 20 units an acre while creating a new R5 district at 35 units an acre. Now we'll move on to the commercial districts. With our commercial districts, we see a multitude of things that we propose to do. One would be delete the reference of the R3 district while utilizing the average R3 density, which was 15 units an acre, of all the previously mentioned communities. This would allow a slight increase from the current number of allowed units from 13 to 15, of which could foster more residential development within the B3 district. However, that's still small enough to not over-incentivize residential development within the general business district. Lastly, we would make the professionals performing the comprehensive plan aware of the underutilization of step-down zoning, as well as highlighting potential areas for new high-density residential growth, utilizing the R4 and the newly created R5 district. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Mayor, for any questions you may have.
All right. Would anyone in the audience like to address council on this matter? If you'll please approach the podium. All right. Seeing none, this public hearing is hereby closed. That brings us to our appearance of citizens. This item of our agenda provides an opportunity for the public to address City Council on any matter that is not on the printed agenda for formal consideration. Comments are limited to matters of city business only. A response will not likely be made at this time, since in most cases, neither the council nor the city manager will be prepared to effectively respond to the concern. The city manager will look into the matter and report back to City Council, or as appropriate, have staff meet with you in an effort to satisfy your concern. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per individual, and groups are encouraged to select a spokesman to represent them. I've been provided a list of individuals desiring to address council this evening, and first is identified as Faithful Taxpayer from Bristol, Tennessee. We have a microphone for you.
Restricted my cloth, so I have nothing to show you. Can you do anything possible to make this more difficult for me? Because of mobility impairments, balance problems, and overall bodily weakness resulting from prolonged sleep deprivation caused by unrelenting fear and terror related to ongoing dangerous crimes endangering all of Bristol, I failed yet again on November 6th and was unable to speak to you on November 7th of 2017. It is only through God's grace and His angels that I managed to survive being injured, banged up, and badly bruised in the dangerous, deteriorated mess in front of and beside Slater, just so that I could speak to you on December 5th of 2017. I have been repeatedly lied to by 2 city reps prior to that evening who advised me that that dangerous, deteriorated mess, what a cruel joke on me, was in fact fully ADA compliant when obviously it is not even remotely ADA compliant, and I was badly injured because I made the mistake of trusting your city reps who took advantage of my trust by lying to me. I was also forced by my doctors to go to the ER for 3 days later for apparent chest-crushing pain and other heart attack symptoms, so this nightmare continues for me to be a total life and health-threatening ordeal for me to try to survive. I realized about Christmas, which of course was ruined for me, that the daily crime date updates I'd been sending you for 61 back-to-back days and nights of November and December 2015 were in fact totally unnecessary, because the Holy Spirit brought to my remembrance that I had actually witnessed 2 of the 5 of you making very public oaths 2.5 years ago in which you raised your right hand and solemnly swore to uphold, defend, protect, endorse, blah, 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 all of city ordinance and state laws. What that means is that I and all of Bristol had already received your word to swiftly and effectively deal with crime and criminals, which is the ultimate purpose of our laws. Therefore, when I first notified you by email on November 1 about the dangerous ongoing crimes impacting all of Bristol that you must have swiftly done on November 2nd, shut them all down, so that what I've been seeing during all of November and all of December must have been some ugly mirage, some hoax perpetuated by Satan himself. There could not have been the ongoing crimes committed by criminals that I thought I saw and reported to you for 61 back-to-back days and nights. How do I know that these sightings must have been mirages and not real crimes? Because when you have 5 ethical city council members who have given you their very word to stop crimes and criminals in their tracks, then obviously everyone in Bristol knows that those 5 city members can be fully trusted to do so, because the 5 of you are ethical and fully trustworthy. What I do know is that the 5 ethical public members absolutely would not violate their very public oaths of office. So since you clearly must already have these criminals arrested on November 2nd so they could not continue to commit crimes against all Bristolians, then tonight I ask you to focus on merely finishing up the last minute details so that their cases can now be prosecuted in court.
You did it.
Do we have any others seeking to address council on matters not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to appointments. This evening, we will consider candidates to fill 2 positions of the city's beer board. The appointments will serve a 4-year term ending January 31, 2022. The candidates are Michael Ketron and Jason Walden. Would anyone like to speak on behalf of the candidates? And while we're doing that, if you'll please mark your ballots and pass them to the city manager.
Michael Ketron frequently attends these meetings, and he served on the beer board before, so I think he knows what he's doing and is a good, responsible member.
And I know Mr. Walden stepped onto the board filling a vacancy and is interested in continuing to serve, so appreciate both of them stepping up.
Okay. Councilwoman Running votes for Michael Ketron and Jason Walden. Vice Mayor Feierabend votes for Michael Ketron and Jason Walden. Mayor Young votes for Michael Ketron and Jason Walden. Councilman Keene votes for Michael Ketron, and Councilwoman Powers votes for Michael Ketron. They've all three received the prerequisite votes.
All right. Congratulations, and thank you for serving. The next item on our agenda is the first reading of Ordinance 18-1, amending the zoning ordinance by adding a new use to Neighborhood Shopping Office Zone B1B District. Mr. Soar, would you please summarize Ordinance 18-1?
Yes, Mayor, as Council will recall, this has been the subject of both the November and the December work sessions so that Council can fully understand the various aspects of this zoning text amendment. As you may recall, this is an issue that was brought forth by the development community requesting some clarification or the allowance of general store type businesses in the B1B district. As you may recall, in 2007, the city adopted the National American Industrial Classification System to determine or to code various permitted uses within our zoning districts. Prior to adoption of the NAICS code, general stores would have been a permissible use within the B1B district, along with similar uses such as convenience stores, grocery stores, and other businesses providing households. However, the NAICS code does not specifically allow general stores such as dollar stores and similar retail businesses within the district. The Planning Commission at the November 20th meeting gave favorable recommendation to establishing general stores as a permitted use within the B1B district. And then also, they recommended a language establishing design standards in both the B1A and the B1B district. As Council may recall, we have design standards that are applicable to the Volunteer Parkway corridor, the State Route 394 corridor, and the downtown. But other areas, such as Weaver Pike, for example, does not have a design standard overlay as an element of that. So that also comes as part of the recommendation from the Planning Commission. I also have our zoning administrator Blake Ayler here to add anything to that or to respond to any questions.
Does any member of council have questions for staff?
Currently, general stores are allowed in certain business districts. Can you tell us which ones those are right now?
Yes, sir, that would be the B3 and the B2.
Okay.
B3 being our general business district, which is along the majority of our corridors, the B2 being downtown. From what I understand, as well as the B2E, if it is created, that would be allowed there as well.
Okay.
No other questions? Do we have a motion?
I will, let me mention one thing before we get to that, Jack, if we can, if it's the appropriate time. I do appreciate all of our council members looking at this a second time and giving this in another 30 days to study this. And what we did, we looked at all B1B, is it B1B or yeah, B1B properties in the city, and looked at those properties to see if it was appropriate for a general store to go into. I do believe some of this ordinance deserves merit, especially pertaining to design standards that I understand are going to continually improve and be studied over the next several months. So as a whole, I am against this ordinance. Although in our meeting, I felt like we came up with a good compromise, so I will be making a motion to amend this ordinance to exclude general stores within that zoning.
Okay. So right now, we don't have a motion yet for the ordinance, but I did speak, and please correct me, council, if we need, but as I understand it, we need to have a motion and a second on the amendment as per the ordinance as proposed, and then we can entertain an amendment
Right.
to that motion.
Then discussion's appropriate, and an amendment to the ordinance would be appropriate. And if we didn't have an amendment, would it die due to if we didn't have a motion, would it die due to lack of a motion?
Yes, it would.
So is there a motion to proceed? Is there a motion for ordinance 18-1? All right, I do not hear a motion for that, so is there,
Mayor, I would like to make a motion that we approve the ordinance by amending it to say everything except exclude general stores within the B1B zoning.
okay, so,
You can do that, but first you need to open the motion up for discussion, and then you can move to amend the text of the ordinance. And so what's presented to you now is the recommendation of the Planning Commission, and that needs to be discussed as a whole. If you decide you want to amend that, then someone can move and second, and you can vote to amend the text, and then you would vote on the main motion as amended.
So if it dies for lack of a motion, it really doesn't die for lack of, do we have to have a
The
motion
motion's
to
been made
discuss
to
it?
amend.
You have nothing to amend right now.
we don't have a motion on the floor at this point.
Can we make a different motion? Not an amendment?
We need to start with the ordinance.
Okay, well, what my motion was going to be is, could we do a motion to send this back to Planning Commission to work on, we had some pretty heavy-duty discussion. I think we'd like to see some higher-level design standards for this zone and perhaps even for some other zones, and we know that's going to be on the work. Whether we can make a motion to send it back for Planning Commission to be looking at that, as well as to look at the different properties that are zoned B1B and B2 to see if they're appropriately zoned see if they're appropriately zoned, particularly in light of our future zoning map. Is that not the right time to do that yet?
Let me say this. There was no motion, and it lacked to move forward in its current state. I made a motion to approve this ordinance with the amendment.
Respectfully, your motion is out of place because there is no main motion for you to amend. There has to be a main motion on the floor, and then you can amend the main motion. You have nothing in front of you now to amend. If you don't take any action on it, then you can certainly direct staff to present it to Planning Commission again. That doesn't require a motion in a second. It just
I think what we might want to talk about, I'm sorry, is what is our end objective? And then, since there isn't a motion, there's no need to vote on a motion, but it would be to, as our city attorney Kaiser said, is to direct the planning staff as to what our end goals and objectives are in regard to what is contained in ordinance 18-1. I think to just be very honest and very frank about, what it is that we want Planning Commission to do going back.
I do not have a copy of the ordinance in front of me, but one of the things that I'd like us to seriously consider is, right now our zoning does not have any design standards for B1B and B1A. I think that's important to have in place, and if we were to strike paragraph 2 of that, and Mr. Soar, do you happen to have a copy of, I have an electronic version, but I don't want to dig and find that. But paragraph 2 is specific to the general merchandise store, and if we could strike that, then we could at least get these basic. If you would,
number 2, it says, would you like for me to read paragraph 2?
Yes, please.
It says, by adding the following to section 402 B1B district, neighborhood shopping office zone, subsection 1, permitted uses. And it does cite a code, 452990, and that refers to all other general merchandise stores, and that would be inclusive of the general stores, the Dollar Generals, those types of stores that are not currently permitted in B1B.
I think we have to be really careful, and I appreciate all of the work that the planning staff and planning commission have done. I think we have to be very careful as to a comprehensive look. You're the one that brought this up, of B1B and its placement throughout the city, as well as our design standards. I think it's real important to protect our neighborhoods. I really do. I think, for me, that's the end game in all of this, is to be sure that our residential neighborhoods are protected, and that we're very careful as to what does go there and the design standards, so that, you know, we retain the value and quality of our neighborhoods.
And that's part of why I wanted to at least see us make a motion on the design standard part of this, because right now there are no design standards for this zone. There will be, but it'll take us months to be able to get through the Planning Commission and then back to us with what those upgrades to design standards are.
So how do we proceed, Jack?
So your motion, you can make a motion.
Well, we don't.
There's a couple of issues
There's not a motion.
that we're looking at. One is zoning, and what we've seen, we've looked at this exhaustively in the Planning Commission, and what we're seeing is zoning that has been in place for how long, Blake? 10 years?
At least 10 years.
At least 10 years. So we're looking at a zoning map that is outdated. We have future land use that was put in place, more than a decade ago. So it's outdated. We're currently looking at all of our zoning and future land use, and all of that information will be available when?
That information will be available soon. I know that's something staff's working on at this time, so that's something we'll certainly be working on in time to come.
So this ordinance might be a little premature in that looking at adding general stores may not be a move that we want to make at this time with the future land use coming to light in a couple of months. So I'm getting the general feel of the council is that we want to postpone that.
I think at this point it's just best, if we don't have a motion, let it die, let it go back to the Planning Commission and the planning staff, and let it come back to us. Like says that it's short-lived until we have the newly updated, and let's address it then when we've got something more comprehensive to even look at, rather than piecemealing it. I think we get into trouble when we start trying to prove this part and not that, and then this is going to come, and then it's just a mess.
And of major concern to our citizens, from what I'm hearing, and I believe other members of council is hearing also, is that our design standards are way too low, and that we really need to take a hard look at that and soon, and get that updated and changed. So my feeling is that we just let it die.
That's my understanding. We have no motion, we have no second. This ordinance dies.
I have no more discussion.
Blake, do you feel like, I don't mean to be so casual, but do you feel like our discussions and what you've heard over a period of time give you enough direction to take it back to the Planning Commission and the Planning Department with our concerns, and for there to come back a more comprehensive addressing our concerns?
Yes, ma'am. I believe it does. It gives us a good building block to start with. We have two great council members that's on Planning Commission that can certainly help us through that process. So, yes, ma'am.
So one question I need to check with council, because we do have a recommendation that the Planning Commission has made. The council does have to address either in agreement or disagreement.
You have disagreed, basically.
Okay.
But if no one on council is willing to move, then...
Okay.
We've addressed it. Sometimes the best thing to do in these situations is nothing until it comes back to us with what we've asked for.
Well, I'll just weigh in that I like what Jack said, though. Just take out the paragraph past the basic design standards that we've already used in other overlay zones.
have to go through the process that's in place, and when we know we might not get some higher level design standards for 6 months, 8 months, that at least we have bare minimum in. And so that would be passing this without that second paragraph and get the basic in. That also sends the message to our planning staff and the planning commission and to our community that we're interested in design standards. We're just going to come back with higher level ones. So that would be my argument for like that approach, to at least have something in place that if there's any projects that come and begin being started, that they at least have to meet the minimum standards. So, and from what I understand, that if we took out that second paragraph, that's what the ordinance would address, would be adding those basic design standards to this B1, B, whatever it is.
Well, I have a question. Wouldn't they have to meet minimum design standards as it is now?
No.
In those districts today, there aren't any design standards.
Right.
Unless they're in an overlay district, like the 394 or Volunteer Parkway, the downtown, for example. So you will see, we have 3 different types of general stores built within our city, and you can look at the difference in the design of those based on which overlay they currently fall in. So, and we do have B1Bs in areas that we don't have overlays, obviously.
I have a question for the members of council that are on the planning commission. When y'all had the discussions with the planning commission, were all of these questions that have been raised, as we have over the past 6 weeks or so, were they all debated and discussed in the detail that we have debated and discussed?
Yes. Yeah, a lot, but I think we took it to a different, I think council's also taken it to a deeper level than the discussions at planning commission too, or added to it and affirmed and just maybe a little stronger on design standards.
And it's really, I understand what you're saying with passing the minimum design standards, but they're still too low.
Oh, I agree. Totally. But at least it gives a basic beginning. So, because the deal is if any projects come in tomorrow, next week, even if they're not done, if their site plan is reviewed, then they go with the standards that are in place at that time. So even if the time they build, we have new standards, doesn't matter. It's when they have their site plan reviewed.
And I understand all that. I guess the concern is how long is it going to take to get this done?
How long is it going to take to get this done?
I apologize, ma'am, that's not a date that I can give you a hard set date on. That's something staff has to work through. We have to research. We have to go to planning commission. At some point, you have to talk to the community. So giving a date with that would be inappropriate by me.
What would be a realistic expectation?
I'd say at least 6 months.
Margaret gives a good time frame, 6 months. We'll work on it and see where it leads us.
Minimum is 6 months. Also, we don't have control, even though 2 of us are on the commission, what questions arise. We have had Planning Commission ask staff to do field trips and more visuals and more in-depth, which they have done, and it's been great. But we can't control that as council. So if they're really interested in more information, et cetera, that process could take 3 times as long as it would if it just went on a timeline.
Well, let me say this. Based on some of the Vice Mayor's comments, I'd like to at least put this forward as a motion to approve Ordinance 18-1 as stated, as was presented earlier. Is there a second to that?
As it was presented earlier?
As it was presented. Because
From Planning Commission?
I'm going to clarify. I think what I understand is Jack can make a motion, Margaret, you could second the motion. I could amend the motion to take out general stores, and then we could pass it with the current design standards without general stores.
There you go.
So for clarification, are you seconding the mayor's motion?
I am seconding the mayor's motion.
All right, we have a motion.
Got that too.
Now you're in a position where you can amend it.
So, I would like for council to consider an amendment, to accept this motion, but to exclude general stores within the B1B zoning.
So can I clarify the paragraph 2 that was mentioned in the ordinance, and I will read that.
You want me to read it?
Just to make sure, I've got it here now.
Okay.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. By adding the following section 402, B1B District Neighborhood Shopping Office Zone, subsection 1, permitted uses, 452990, all other general merchandise stores. That's the portion that, based on our conversation, has been the
You want to exclude that?
problem. So
Yes.
we will exclude paragraph 2
That's your amendment.
of the ordinance.
That's my
But do we have to vote on his motion first and then come back and vote on the
The
amendment?
amendment.
We vote on we need a second for the motion to amend, and then we need to vote on the motion to amend. If the amendment passes, then you can then discuss the ordinance as amended and vote on that ordinance as amended.
I'll second his amendment.
So we have a second to the amendment. Discussion on the amendment. Seeing none, Tara, would you please call the roll on the amendment to ordinance 18-1?
Councilwoman Rennie?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fryerobin?
Yes.
Councilman King?
Yes.
Councilwoman Powers?
No.
And Mayor Yang?
Yes.
Okay, Mayor, so this is approved, the amended version has approved. We'll bring that back to you next month, I think February the 6th.
We're halfway.
Okay, I'm with you. Okay, we're halfway there, okay.
So the amendment passes by a majority vote. Now we have discussion on the amended ordinance 18-1, which, to restate, this ordinance 18-1 has been, paragraph 2, the all other general store has been stricken from the ordinance. So, first of all, let me ask, would anyone in the audience like to address council on ordinance 18-1? Seeing none, discussion?
My dissenting vote, I'd like to qualify it, was because I believe, as I stated earlier, that I would prefer to see a deeper dive. And so, I fully support the amendment. I think that's the right thing to do. But I think that it is incumbent, again, to repeat myself, that we make sure that we protect our neighborhoods, that we protect the investments that have been made in those neighborhoods, and that we need to see a deeper dive with greater comprehension that includes design standards of the appropriate caliber. And I agree with my fellow council representatives, but I just wanted to clarify that I think there still needs to be a deeper dive.
I'll add to that also, too, that in our design standards, I hope that we have certain designations, certain zoning that have more stricter design standards than others. For instance, split-face block has been mentioned multiple times. That may be appropriate on a Lowe's store in a B3 district, but it's certainly not in other districts. So I'm really hoping that we get it right when we do it. I do think, though, that this does at least put some kind of design standards within the B1B district. So I'm with you on that. I think we're all on the same page, and I hope the Planning Commission grabs that as well.
I was going to just thank our planning staff for thoroughness, for detail, for anticipation of our questions and issues, both from Planning Commission and Council. We're not the easiest to work with sometimes, and also sometimes Council and Planning Commission are headed in a little different direction, and that makes it difficult. But what I also really appreciate is I think as a city and community, we're learning more about planning principles and best practices, and one of those examples is the step-down zoning. A little bit of education about it, visuals, trying to understand that concept and how it can work well in communities. Also, I think we probably could benefit from some more information about mixed-use zoning. I certainly have had discussions in the past that some of our larger cities, their neighborhoods are rich with culture and daily life because they do have stores, they have restaurants, they have different things in that neighborhood. But so I think we don't want to exclude things necessarily, including for me the general stores, but in the idea of protection is, what do they look like? How do they fit in? What's the placement? What are those setbacks? All those things that make them part of a neighborhood, not a burden on a neighborhood. So I think also learning more about mixed-use zoning, how that can benefit communities, but how you control it to make it fit with the neighborhoods would also be of benefit as we move forward. But I really appreciate the work that we're doing and the learning that we as Planning Commission and Council are going through with y'all's help as well.
I appreciate that we're looking forward to the future and future neighborhoods and how those can be structured. But I would like to remind everyone sitting here that the reason that we will have new growth is by being business friendly, by encouraging people to expand the businesses that are here, to bring in new businesses. We want to keep our focus on our citizens and the people that do business here, because that's the reason that we're here. We appreciate all the effort. We're going through some growing pains. We've made tremendous progress. We appreciate you guys suffering through that with bearing a lot of the burden of our growth, and we really appreciate the deep dive that we're asking you to do. It's not easy. I know how painful it is for you, but in the future, you'll have a monument and a testament to all the hard work that you guys have done, and we really appreciate your patience and your vision and all the hard work that's gone into this. But it's really all about the people that live here and do business here. We just want to stay people-friendly and business-friendly, and that's our main focus.
So council has reminded me that we do have a motion. We have approved the amendment. We do have a motion and a second. On the amended version, striking paragraph 2, which excludes general stores in the B1B zoning.
Correct. And to reiterate, the part that's really the meat of what's changing is the design standards are being applied to both these zones, but not the general store section.
There is no general store.
That's out now. That has been struck.
Bottom line.
That's been struck.
If you didn't happen to hear Councilman Powers, she said the all general stores caveat has been stricken from this ordinance. So it sounds like we're ready for the vote. So Tara, will you please call the roll on ordinance 18-1 as amended?
Okay. Councilwoman Renning?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fowler?
Yes.
Councilman King?
Yes.
Councilwoman Powers?
Yes.
Mayor Young?
Yes.
Hey, Mayor, the amended version then will come before you on February 6th, along with the public hearing.
Okay. All right, thank you. Next item. The next item on our agenda is the second reading of ordinance 17-6, amending the zoning ordinance by adding a new section for the Central Business District expansion, B2E. Staff summarized this issue during the public hearing. Does any member of council have questions for staff? All right. Is there a motion to take action on this item?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Would any member of council like to discuss ordinance 17-6?
One further comment kind of addresses what we were talking about a little while ago. This should really enhance business downtown. Should not affect your business negatively, but it really should help businesses in and around you to relax some of the standards that are currently down there. I will also ask, we do know we have a few things, it's a special district, and there's been a lot of things that's been done over the years, parking and loading areas and that kind of thing. So I'm really hoping that our staff looks at those things in the future when problems arise. So, and I appreciate all that's been done at this point.
And the intention is to promote growth in the area, which will hopefully raise your property value. values, but I highly encourage you to get in touch with the Planning Commission, and any specific questions that you have, they would be happy to answer anything that you would want to know.
One other thing I'll remind, as we briefly touched on during public hearing, this is a motion to create the zone. So there are no properties, if we vote in the affirmative, there are no properties that will be immediately changed zoning-wise, but that will be forthcoming as it can go through Planning Commission and through some of that process. So some of that's a few months off. But so we've had some discussion on it. Further discussion? All right. Let me ask.
Anything else you want to say over here?
No. The public did have an opportunity to comment on this issue during public hearing, so with that, I believe we're ready for the vote. Tara, please call the roll.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fryerrobin?
Yes.
Councilman King?
Yes.
Councilwoman Powers?
Yes.
Mayor Young?
Yes. All right. Next on our agenda is a second reading of Ordinance 17-7, amending the zoning ordinance to change multifamily residential densities in 2 districts and adding the high-density multifamily R5 district. Staff summarized this during the earlier public hearing this evening. Does any member of council have a question for staff? All right. Is there a motion to take action on this item?
Motion.
Second.
All right. Would any member of council like to discuss this ordinance?
I would just like to reiterate that this is moving toward higher standards and also to be more in line with our neighbors. We were a little lax with the number of houses that could go into an area, so this is just going to further our vision of creating a better community with better design standards.
One of those opportunities I like about what has been considered and presented to us in this is it makes it more consistent for the developers who are seeking to come to Bristol and have some similar zoning to what some of the other cities that they currently work in. So I think that makes some standard work perspective from what they see in the different cities. So that's a good thing. And again, this had public comment earlier this evening, so we had appearance of citizens then. So with that, I believe we're ready for the vote. Tara, please call the roll.
Councilwoman Rennie?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fryerrobin?
Yes.
Councilman King?
Yes.
Councilwoman Powers?
Yes.
Mayor Young?
Yes. All right. This brings us to our consent agenda. Mr. Soar, would you please read the items on tonight's consent agenda?
Yes, Mayor. First item is the minutes from the December 5th, 2017 City Council meeting. And we have the minutes from the December 12th, 2017 City Council work session. Resolution 1801 authorizing Amendment 2 to the contract agreement with the Tennessee Department of Transportation for the reconstruction of East Cedar Street. Resolution 18-2 authorizing the amendment of an agreement related to the demolition landfill. Resolution 18-3 awarding a bid for the purchase of a mini excavator and trailer. Resolution 18-4 awarding a bid for property maintenance and mowing services. Resolution 18-5 adopting the amended and restated rules and procedures of the City Council. And Resolution 18-6 approving the submittal of a grant application to the Tennessee Department of Health. And Resolution 18-7 awarding a bid for the purchase of a utility side-by-side vehicle.
All right. Would any member of council like any item to be removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the items included in the consent agenda?
Motion.
Second.
All right. Tara, please call the roll.
Councilman Rennie?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Fryerrobin?
Yes.
Councilman King?
Yes.
Councilwoman Powers?
Yes.
Mayor Young?
Yes. All right. That brings us to our Board of Education liaison report. Dr. Gary Lilly is with us.
Hope you all had a nice Christmas and New Year's. welcome back our teachers today for a work day, and we're bringing the students back tomorrow. So it's always nice to have them back with us. But we had lots of things going on over the Christmas break. Before Christmas, we had a girls basketball tournament, the Doc Maples Holiday Hoops, and that brought in 8 teams, including teams from Charlotte, North Carolina, Rutledge, Tennessee, and Huntington, West Virginia. And then, of course, after Christmas, you've probably heard of the Arby's Classic. So that was a huge success this year. We welcomed 8 teams into the tournament, including local, of course, but also from Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Virginia. So I'm pretty sure that we broke some attendance records this year, too. This coming weekend, we've got the Brawl in the Hall Wrestling Tournament, and 24 teams to that tournament, including some from Virginia, North Carolina, and Middle Tennessee. So we're always thankful for the opportunity to have some spirited competition in these tournaments, but it is also good for the school system and good for our community as folks come in and they get to enjoy our city and get to eat here and spend money here, and that's good for all of us. I was glad that the weather cooperated with us during the Arby's Classic, and it's questionable how much it's going to cooperate from this point. The cold does cause us problems like it causes everyone else problems. This afternoon I heard a fire alarm go off. Actually, I didn't hear it, but was told about it at Tennessee High. And so pretty soon after that, I got over there, and there were fire trucks all around Tennessee High. And so we had a sprinkler head that froze and burst the pipe, and then as it thawed out, water started running, which set off the fire alarm, but it also flooded the place. And the fire department folks were there, really a big help. They were helping clean up the water, get a handle on the problem. So really appreciated their help, and really we've just got an excellent relationship with all the city's emergency personnel. They come to our rescue time after time. So I just want to say thank you for all their assistance. We really appreciate it. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. And for our city manager's report, Mr. Sora.
Let's have a couple of dates that I'd like to remind City Council of. As you know, we're about to embark on our annual development of our fiscal 2019 budget, and one of the things that we like to do early on is to get input from City Council as to your areas of interest and areas that you would like to see us focus on as we develop our goals and objectives for the coming year. So this year we'll have a day-long retreat, if you will, on January the 23rd, Tuesday, January 23rd. We will hold this at our Steel Creek Nature Center in the I guess the library work study area that's in the basement of the new expansion. We'll start at 8:30 and we'll go as long as you all want to go. Also remind you of our Tri-Cities legislative reception and Day on the Hill with our state legislative delegation on January 29th and 30th. As you may recall, at our December meeting, the Tri-Cities legislative agenda was approved not only by this governing body, but also the councils of both Johnson City and Kingsport. So we'll be taking that forward to our legislative delegation on those 2 dates. I'd also like to express my appreciation to Chief Wade and also Chief Carrier and their leadership and their personnel in the search for the missing juvenile on Friday evening, along with representatives from many local agencies, including Virginia State Police, that brought in their helicopter and some fairly sophisticated equipment to assist in the search. Wellmont also placed a helicopter in the search. We had K-9 units not only from our department, but also from Tennessee Department of Corrections, as well as Washington County, Virginia Sheriff's Office's tracking dogs. We also had regional search and rescue teams, and we had the very valuable assistance of the Mountain Trail Riders ATV Club, which actually located the child approximately 3 miles from the initial search area. So tremendous effort by all involved. And I would be remiss in not mentioning the Hilton Garden Inn at Exit 7. They complimented a room for the family in their stay overnight. Also, I'd like to make you aware that our Fire Station 5 is now operational. and we'll have an official dedication to that in the coming weeks, but we are now operational on the west end of town.
Excellent. That brings us to City Council comments, and before we get into that, I'd like to just take a moment and recognize we've got a few familiar faces in the audience, and one of those is former Mayor Staten. Good to have you with us again, and for those who did join us tonight, appreciate you coming out and either letting your voice be heard or listening to the process. Zoning can be a little bit detailed, as you saw the discussion, and with that, I'll turn it over for City Council comments.
I'll jump in. Happy New Year to everyone. I'd just like to say that we have so many great opportunities in front of us. You know, I think a lot of times when we have these discussions, whether it's about planning or Parks and Rec or budget or whatever, you know, I'm going to choose this year to look at all of them as great opportunities for us to be able to take our community in places and in a manner that maybe we've never gone before. Sounds sort of like Star Trek, right? But, you know, we are doing deeper dives into the different opportunities that we have in front of us. You know, there's nothing more important to economic development than the proper planning. And, you know, design standards, they are economic development. We don't want to design standard ourselves out of being competitive economically. But we do want to be sure that we have those design standards in place that are attractive, that add to the aesthetic value of our community,